So this video is potentially a little bit more in the weeds. If you're interested in the biochemistry and the metabolism of ketosis and why it can be extremely useful for fat loss, hang in there with me. I'd like to also do a video on the other end of the scale of ketosis as well, and sort of explain why both diets can actually really work for losing a lot of body fat, and how there can be a zone in the middle where you don't want to go, the no-go zone right in the middle. But on the end of ketosis, I want to explain why it can lead to so much fat loss. So hopefully you'll stick in there with me. But essentially, when we go in ketosis, we require very low insulin levels to make this happen. The reason is insulin is one of its roles is to prevent us breaking down fat and essentially stopping us from doing beta oxidation, breaking down our fats. So when insulin gets low enough, which obviously happens when you are on a low carbohydrate diet, your insulin goes low and you start doing this thing called beta oxidation, which is essentially we just go in and we start breaking down the fats that we have stored or the fats that we've eaten, and we start shoving them and sending them down into the mitochondria. But what happens in this process of doing this beta oxidation or the breakdown of fat is that we end up using up a lot of something called NAD or NAD+. So what will happen in this process is our NAD plus will actually get converted into NADH. So essentially we're reducing our NAD plus pool and we end up with more NADH. This is important because if you've ever heard of the Krebs cycle, and there is a picture that I will put up in with this as well, so you can sort of have a look at what I'm talking about. But essentially when we're going through this Krebs cycle and we're making energy, we are requiring this NAD plus to be available in order to convert something from called malate to oxaloacetate. Now, when we go through a lot of beta oxidation, as I said, we're using up a lot of that NAD plus. And so if we have lower levels of NAD plus and more NADH, we're going to have a very hard time converting our malate into our oxaloacetate. So the problem for this means that when it comes to our metabolism, instead of converting the malate to oxaloacetate, we get this buildup of malate. And I've got a picture there to show you as well in a study of how the more beta oxidation, the more fat breakdown that you do, the higher your malate levels will go and the lower your oxaloacetate levels will go. And essentially, as I said, it's just because you can't convert that malate into oxaloacetate if you don't have enough NAD+. Another really interesting about oxaloacetate is that oxaloacetate is also used to create this other system called gluconeogenesis. And when we are in ketosis, we're having a low carbohydrate diet. As we know, we do still need some glucose. And so we need this gluconeogenesis to be actively happening in our liver in order to have some blood glucose still available. So not only are we not able to convert the malate to the oxaloacetate, and we get reduced oxaloacetate levels, we also reduce that oxaloacetate even more because we're using it to make this gluconeogenesis happen in the liver. So from both reasons, we're ending up with lower oxaloacetate levels. So basically, if you haven't followed any of what I've just said, all you need to know is that because of this ketosis state, we are ending up with less of this thing called oxaloacetate. Why is this important? Well, in order for our Krebs cycle to work and make energy efficiently, essentially, we need that oxaloacetate to essentially combine with acetyl-CoAs to be able to then make energy. And we're not going to be able to do that if we don't have any oxaloacetate to combine with that acetyl-CoA. So we end up essentially getting this sort of bottleneck of malate. We can't make the oxaloacetate, and then we can't combine it with the acetyl-CoA. So this ends up producing something called ketones. And so we'll end up with products like acetoacetate and beta-hydroxybutyrate. And the interesting thing again about the beta-hydroxybutyrate is that it also requires more of that NAD+. So in all ways, we're reducing that NAD+ and ending up with more NADH. But what's so interesting about metabolism, and this is the exciting bit, is that when our oxaloacetate levels go low we can't combine it with the acetyl-CoA, and we can't continue this Krebs cycle. But in order to actually make new fat, so you're probably thinking, well, where does all that fat go that it can't, if it's coming through beta oxidation and it's becoming these ketones, where does it go? Like, what if we end up with too much buildup? Does it end up creating fat? It simply can't. And the reason for that is that we need that oxaloacetate and the acetyl-CoA to combine together to produce something called citrate. And it's the citrate that, if we have too much coming through the Krebs cycle, too much energy essentially, then we funnel that into making new fat. This is called de novo lipogenesis. So anytime we're making new fat in the body, so let's say you've eaten too much and your body starts storing it as fat, we require too much citrate to build up, and we start converting that to new fat. But the difference with ketogenesis that's really interesting is that once we produce those ketones, we can't make citrate because we don't have enough oxaloacetate. So we actually can't then use those ketones to make new fat. So the interesting thing, in summary, about being in ketosis is that you end up basically doing this one-way street with fats. You end up breaking them down through beta oxidation, but you can't end up making new fat. Whereas in other situations, if you have normal levels of oxaloacetate and you're not in ketosis, you can actually convert any extra fat that you don't need and you're not burning off into new fat via de novo lipogenesis. So if you're still with me, the interesting thing about ketosis is that we end up not being able to use any extra of that energy to make new fat. Essentially, once we've broken down that fat and we've made those ketones, they get sent out into the bloodstream and they can be used elsewhere to become energy, because they are just basically acetyl-CoA. But we can't actually use them to make new fat, which is really, really interesting for our metabolism. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that one. If you're wanting the little pictures so that you can actually get your head around what I'm talking about, swipe to the right and you'll see them.